This car survived the gas crisis, survived government crackdowns, survived Ford almost killing it with a front-wheel drive replacement. It wasn't European, it wasn't exotic, but it became the street king. Cheap, loud, and terrifying to anything that dared line up next to it. This is the true story of the Foxbody Mustang, the unlikely savior of Ford's pony car, and the rise of a legend. The world before the Fox. Late 1970s, America was a wasteland for performance lovers. The first oil embargo had hammered car makers into submission. High-compression V8s from the late 60s were now smog-choked relics. Gas prices had doubled and
Word of one irate motorist, the first day of the odd-even system was a disaster.
Line today is longer than it's ever been. I have no explanation for it.
I think it's terrible. I really think it's terrible. I'm in here for an hour already.
golden era of cheap horsepower was officially over. The Mustang II, born of panic, was a smaller Pinto-based coupe designed to appease regulators and save Ford money. It sold decently at first, but to car enthusiasts it was a betrayal. Reviews called it gutless. The GT badge returned in '76, but its V8 made a pathetic 140 horsepower. Barely more than a modern Corolla. Meanwhile, the imports were feasting. The Datsun 240Z had shown Americans that a sports car could be affordable and reliable. BMW's 2002 and its successor, the E21 3 Series, were becoming the aspirational choice for young professionals who still wanted to drive something fun. Volkswagen dropped the MK1 GTI in Europe and rewrote the hot hatch rulebook. The performance conversation had shifted overseas, and Detroit was in danger of being left behind. Ford's halo car, the one that created the pony car segment, was now little more than a commuter coupe with sporty stripes. If things didn't change soon, the Mustang was going to be remembered as a fad that burned out with the '60s. Rising stakes. Inside Ford's boardroom, the mood was grim. Mustang sales had slid from over 300,000 units a year at its peak to barely half that by the late '70s. GM was quietly working on the third-generation Camaro
for 1970.
When Firebird, sleeker, lighter, and much faster than before. Chrysler was clinging to life but still had the big block E-bodies in the catalog. The Mustang risked becoming irrelevant in its own segment. The pressure was coming from outside too. The Japanese were bringing over sports cars that were reliable, affordable, and increasingly quick. The RX-7 and Supra were coming for the American coupe market. In Europe, BMW was winning on track with the 320i, and Mercedes was about to unleash the 190e. It wasn't enough for Ford to just make a better Mustang. They had to make something that could be competitive in a completely different performance landscape. And then came the biggest scare. Ford's own product planners considered replacing the Mustang entirely with a front-wheel drive, Mazda-based coupe. To the accountants, it made sense. Smaller, more efficient, ready for a fuel-conscious future. But to the Mustang faithful, it would have been sacrilege. If that plan had gone through, the Mustang as we know it would have died in the early '80s. Visionary moment. Enter the Fox platform. Born in 1978, it was Ford's new lightweight rear-wheel drive chassis designed for everything from sedans to luxury coupes. It wasn't created for the Mustang specifically, but it turned out to be the perfect foundation. It was longer in wheelbase, had better weight distribution, and could be easily adapted to handle a range of engines from 4-cylinder to V8. The Mustang's design team seized the opportunity. They fought to keep the Mustang rear drive. They fought to keep space under the hood for a proper V8. And in 1979, the first Foxbody Mustang rolled off the line. It was a fresh start, modern styling, more interior space, better ride and handling than the Mustang II, and a platform that could actually evolve. The early cars were still underpowered by modern standards. The V8s barely cracked 140 horsepower at first, but the bones were there. Ford had given itself a second chance. Innovation payoff, the return of the 5.0. The turning point came in 1982 when Ford brought back the GT badge with the 5.0 high-output V8. Suddenly, Mustang fans had a reason to come back to the showroom. The HO motor wasn't a new design. It was Windsor small block architecture dating back to the 60s, but it was tuned for more compression, more camshaft, and more spark. The car was still carb-fed, but it felt alive again. Then 1987 hit and everything changed. The Mustang got its aero nose facelift, smoother bodywork, and, most importantly, electronic fuel injection. Power climbed to a quoted 225 horsepower and 300 pound-feet of torque, but anyone who strapped one to a dyno knew those numbers were conservative. These cars were running 0 to 60 in about 6 seconds and quarter miles in the mid-14s, as quick as a Corvette from just a few years earlier for half the price. And this was a car you could buy for under $15,000. It wasn't just affordable performance, it was a statement. You didn't have to be rich to go fast. You didn't have to buy German to have fun. The 5.0 became a badge of honor, a symbol of rebellion against rising gas prices and boring econoboxes, specs and legacy. Street King status. The numbers only tell part of the story. What made the Foxbody dangerous was its power-to-weight ratio and how easy it was to modify. Swap the gears, put on a set of headers and a better intake, and suddenly you had a mid-13-second street car. For a generation of young enthusiasts, the Mustang was the first car they learned to wrench on, the one they learned to gap plugs on, to set timing, to swap cams and clutches. This created an entire 5.0 subculture. Friday night grudge matches, parking lot bench racing, burnouts on Main Street. Magazines like Muscle Mustangs and Fast Fords were filled with budget builds and quarter-mile shootouts. Vanilla Ice name-dropped his 5.0 in a #1 single.
Rolling in my 5.0. Let's go. Rolling in my 5.0. Yep, you know. Rolling in my 5.0. Check this. Here we go.
Cementing it as a pop culture icon. The Mustang wasn't just back, it was cool again. The European detour. But the Foxbody story wasn't limited to America. In Germany, the car became something else entirely, an outlaw. Because Ford never sold the Mustang officially, the only ones there were brought over by U.S. servicemen stationed overseas. On or near bases like Ramstein and Bitburg, you'd see notchback LXs and GT hatchbacks with American plates rumbling around among Golfs and BMWs. For German car fans, it was like seeing a UFO. The sound was thunderous. The styling was square and aggressive compared to the rounded European coupes, but owning one wasn't easy. Gas was far more expensive, and the dreaded TÜV inspections made modifying them a nightmare. Anything louder or lower than stock could get you a fine or even get your car off the road. That didn't stop the determined ones. It just made the Mustang even more mysterious. When you saw one screaming down the Autobahn, you knew its owner had fought hard just to keep it legal. Foxbody versus Germany's best. And when they did show up, the Foxbody could hold its own in the right fight. Against a BMW E3325i, the Mustang had more torque and more straight-line speed. Against the M3, it was faster to 100 kilometers per hour, but slower through a slalom. Against an Audi Quattro, it had the legs in the dry but lost in the wet. Against a Golf GTI, it was brutal but less agile. These comparisons were the start of 1,000 pub arguments, and they still rage online today. The Europeans were better balanced cars, sure, but the Mustang delivered theater. It was cheap drama. You didn't just drive it, you performed in it. DTM and AVUS, the shocking chapter. The most surprising part of the Foxbody story came in 1984 when the Mustang hit the grid in DTM, Germany's brand new touring car championship. Nobody expected an American V8 coupe to do well, and yet on power circuits like Berlin's AVUS, two massive straights connected by a pair of hairpins, the Mustang was unstoppable. It won heats, ran at the front, and forced the German teams to take it seriously. Then came Gerd Ruch, the privateer who became the face of the DTM Mustang. From 1988 to 1994, he raced a Foxbody against the factory-backed BMW M3s, Mercedes 190e Evos, and Audi V8 Quattros. His Mustang was carbureted, made over 500 horsepower, the most of any car on the grid, and was famously the cheapest to run. Fans loved it because it was raw, sideways, and loud. Even if it finished in the midfield, it stole the show. Weaknesses: the price of raw speed. But let's be honest, the Foxbody wasn't perfect. The brakes were barely adequate for spirited driving, let alone repeated track laps. Hard stops led to fade, and even period reviewers called them marginal. The chassis was flexible. T-top cars were known to creak so much you could feel the roof shake. And yet, all these flaws became part of its charm. They gave owners a reason to upgrade. Subframe connectors, better pads, suspension kits. The Fox had one of the richest aftermarket ecosystems of any car ever built. You could turn a wallowy GT into a track weapon or a 10-second drag strip monster with a credit card and a long weekend. The cult of mods. This is where the Fox cemented its legacy. The 5.0 small block was nearly unkillable. Junkyard GT 40 heads, a cam swap, and sticky tires turned a 14-second car into a 12-second car. Add nitrous or a blower and you had supercar performance for used Honda money. And unlike modern cars, you didn't need a laptop or dealer tools to work on it. A basic socket set and a timing light were enough to transform the car. For thousands of young gearheads, the Fox was a rolling education. The car they learned to wrench, break, and rebuild. Final verdict. So how good was it? The Foxbody wasn't refined. It wasn't flawless. It was loud, crude, and occasionally scary at the limit. But that's exactly what made it great. It was the car that kept the Mustang alive when it could have died. The car that brought cheap V8 performance back to the masses. The car that embarrassed imports on drag strips and shocked Germans on their own racetracks. So how good was it? Good enough to be worshipped 40 years later. Good enough to make people fight to keep it rear drive. Good enough to start a whole tuning industry that still thrives today. The Foxbody wasn't just good, it was essential.